I'm Caroline Hill, Editor-in-Chief of Legal IT Insider, and I'm joined today by Joanne Humber, who's Marketing Consultant for LCT4, which is Legal Competence, the leading legal competence organisation. Hi, Jo.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for joining me. It's a very topical conversation right now.
I think so.
So to introduce you properly, so you obviously, although you're called marketing consultant, you're, I think, the face of LCT4, LTC4. I reverse it. LTC4, which stands for Legal Technology Core Competencies Certification Coalition, which is a bit of a mouthful. And so there's a not-for-profit business which was set up in 2016.
No, it was set up actually. It started in about 2010. We have our 10th anniversary this year. And it was started by people involved in delivering legal IT training in law firms all across the world. So we had, I think, up to 95 different individuals were involved in developing the core competency framework, because we realized that particularly lawyers don't want to know about the features and functions of software. They want to know how to do the things they want to do, the workflows that they follow with the technology they've got. They don't even think about, I'm in Word 2010 or I'm in Outlook. They think, I've got to send an email and attach a document. So we wanted them to be very much workflow based, and that's how it started. And it's been going, as I say, 10 years this year, pretty much. Okay. I got involved right from the start.
Yeah.
But I started when I actually left my full-time training delivery job. I then got involved on promoting the whole idea of competence and having an industry standard, which we've never had for technology competence.
So that was full-time in 2016?
That was the 2016.
Okay, interesting.
That's when I started really getting involved more actively, I suppose, because it's still, the sad thing is it's still really important now.
Yeah, well, it's even more important. I mean, so I'm going to come on. I'm fascinated because you have interacted with lawyers and technology for so many years, and there is a sea change. But I'm going to come on to this because how much of a sea change is, there's a big question mark, isn't there? But so just to finish talking about the organisation, which I've round this up at the end. But so it's got learning plans and certifications, and you've been for a long time arguing that people ought to achieve a certain level of certification in order to really practice as a lawyer. And those are broken down. Come on in a bit to talk about how it's changed and become more modular, perhaps a bit more accessible. But so back, you to go back to you. So you've been teaching. I think you said you were first teaching lawyers to use a mouse in 1995, is that right?
Yeah, well, I was only 15 at the time, of course.
Of course you were, Jo.
Sorry. No, that
was
a
I.
Very interesting experience, because we were teaching a firm of lawyers local to me where I was living at the time, and they all needed to use Windows for the first time. The firm actually chose WordPerfect for Windows as their word processing package. But they needed to learn how to use a computer, basically, and they needed to learn how to use a mouse. So I can actually remember a lawyer waving it around and going, nothing seems to be happening on the screen, because they didn't have any idea.
Right.
And that's fair enough. Why should they?
Yeah.
So that was quite a challenge. And interesting, over the years, there are still people who are a bit like that. And that's fine. There are people who find it a real struggle. But there are also people who think it's kind of a badge of honour to say, I'm not very good with my computer.
Right. Okay.
And that's just not possible anymore.
Do you think so? So what way, I mean, I want to dig down a bit more and get much more granular, but at the high level, what changes have you seen in the way that lawyers interact with tech? There's a lot of enthusiasm now from some quarters. Has there been a radical change, do you think, in the way that lawyers are interacting with technology?
Certainly over the last period of time, whether we call it a year or more than a year now, I think they've decided that they do need to know more about tech, because they haven't got somebody they can just call on who's sitting next to them. and say, help, can you sort this document out, and just kind of leave it to someone else. So they've had to suddenly learn more, which has been good. I mean, from a trainer perspective, it's been great because we've been pushing against really a closed door with a lot of lawyers for many years. And they'd come to the class, but they go, I just want to know how to do emails. You know, I don't want to know about document formats and things like that. But now there's definitely a move towards improved skills because they have to have them. Because even if people go back into the office, which they will, there's still going to be an element of working remotely. Perhaps they won't have the same level of support that they had before. I'm afraid, you know, the secretary that sat and did all your work is, you know, an animal that will not exist as far as I can tell. So I think, you know, there's been good things about this lockdown in terms of people really learning new skills. But there is still my concern, and I think as I mentioned in the piece that I wrote that you very kindly published, is that they are not producing quality work necessarily.
Yeah.
And that's scary.
It's really scary. So I'm gonna, because you've got personal and recent experience, which we'll come on to. But so what do you think are the training? So I have heard over the last year, just a kind of FYI, that so speaking to people, CIOs, that people who were involved in training on the tech side, so they kind of marvelled at the increased appetite for training, actually. So which is a really great thing. But there are kind of core systemic failings, aren't there, in terms of delivery or lack of delivery of training? What do you think the core, perhaps, I mean, we can talk about US and UK because you meet people globally, you know, you've got global representation, and so, but just as general view, what do you think are the core failings in terms of educating lawyers and how to use technology?
I think the biggest problem is the fact that it's never been treated as a serious topic. You know, they're very willing and able and have to continue to develop their skills with everything else, you know, their legal skills. But to be told that they have to achieve a level of competence in making visual communications or security or managing documents and emails or, you know, CRM, to actually say you've got to reach a level is something that's never really been introduced.
Yeah.
But we've noticed recently, and I think you and I have discussed this before, that some of the American bar associations across the state, about 39, 40 of them now, have now included in their CLE requirements that lawyers should have a good understanding of technology, but it's very vague.
It's
like 3 hours every 3 years. I mean, come on, you know, they use it all the time.
So it's interesting. So I'm glad you brought it up. So I think California recently became the 39th state, and I had a conversation about it on Clubhouse. So they've introduced tech competence into the rules of professional conduct, and it follows changes to the ABA rules, doesn't it? So the American Bar Association in 2012, they said that technology, they introduced a very vague wording saying that the rules say, and I'm reading this as you can tell, that lawyers have a duty to keep abreast of the changes in the law and practice, including the risks associated with relevant technology. So the ABA introduced that wording, and then each state has adopted it within their own model, their own rules. So do you think, I suppose I've got a few questions. One, to me that sounds really vague. I'm not really even sure.
Very vague.
So do you think it has, I suppose maybe we start positive, right? I guess on the positive front, it sets a tone, doesn't it? I suppose that they're setting a tone and they're at least acknowledging that there are obligations when it comes to technology.
But it's so vague that it actually really you could say anything could fill the bill. You know, there's no standard to try and achieve. It's good because it's opened up it's put the word technology somewhere for the first time. You know, here we are in 2021, but it still leaves it so vague and so woolly that really it can be interpreted by a law firm any which way they like. And in a way, the same sort of things happened in the UK, because we don't have this CPD thing in the same way that we did with the 16 hours a year, and everybody'd suddenly rush around in the last month, quickly do any kind of training that was available. Well, we don't have that now.
Right.
And again, it's up to the firm to feel that it's important. So it's about the culture of the firm, really. And I don't think anyone can make that happen apart from the top.
So do you think that these rules don't have teeth, or you think that, I mean, do they have teeth? In Florida, for example, so I think you're one of the states that you've referred to before, so you have to do 3 hours every 3 years or something,
over a 3-year period
of tech training.
Yeah,
that's the rules.
Yeah.
Okay, so really, and I wonder whether it puts any firm on the hook, really, in terms of if they don't. I mean, I guess I don't think this is going to be. I think there are different ways that firms are on the hook for failures in technology competence, perhaps within the various legislation. For example, if they mess up with privacy, then there's privacy legislation that they could fall foul of. If they, I think that they could probably fall foul of different legislation if they mess up when it comes to tech. Probably this isn't really where there's teeth.
I think the problem is that the risk area is looked upon as security, particularly. Data privacy, all of those kinds of things, which obviously technology implements those things. But there's huge risks in, document quality, in time spent, huge risks, and doing things badly or inefficiently, which are not talked about. It is a bit too vague in my view. But then, I feel strongly about this, as you can tell.
Well, it's good because you're in the right job. So at least in the US, so California, as we said, is the 39th state. So, the majority again have got there in terms of at least acknowledging some wording. The SRA in the UK, the Solicitors Regulation Authority, they have declined to include the wording tech or introduce the concept of tech competence in their regulations, haven't they?
Well, it's not so much the regulations. My concern was that it was the new SQE exam, which is for new lawyers. It's not actually mentioned, as far as I can tell. I mean, I haven't read every single word of it, but it wasn't something that was thought to be the responsibility of the SRA.
Yes.
Well, yeah, I mean, I can understand they've got a huge amount that individual needs to be competent. But when you get a situation, and this is unfortunately typical, of a young person who's come out of law school and is now studying how to work in a law firm, they have never used Outlook. It's a silly thing, but if you think about it, why would they?
Right.
Why would they use something like Outlook?
Yeah.
Why would they ever want to set up a meeting online? Those are the skills that you need to have in order to work efficiently in a law firm. Yeah. And if the law schools and the legal profession is not driving proficiency in those very basic skills, how can you expect them to do a good job when they start? Yeah. So I just think that all of the legal organizations, wherever they may be, need to just start thinking about how to include competence. And it's a workflow thing. It's not how does Word work or, how does Outlook work necessarily, but it's about having the skills to go into an office and at least have an understanding of how things work.
And I'm surprised that I think the SRA has been fairly categoric in saying that it's not their responsibility, that it's not something that law firms or, that should be done further down the chain, and that's interesting because I think that's true. But as you've already said before, when we talked about the US, it's about tone from the top, isn't it? If that's a pretty cliched expression, but it's really about, and actually, I personally think that in this day and age when, it's a difficult topic, there's no doubt about it, because there's all kinds of shades of grey and there's all sorts of questions over what do we mean by tech competence. But actually, if you look to the US example, you can at least make a start. You can start by acknowledging the importance and at least give firms the sense of this is not optional any longer.
No, it is something which has got to just be part of the everyday training. Unfortunately, training as a word is very unpopular.
Yeah.
We talk about, in fact, when we have our very regular networking meetings that we have here and in the US, we talk about, should we call it something different? Should we say this is a digital skills specialist? Should we say this is a subject matter expert? Should we call them support analysts? I don't know, something which, because if you call someone an IT trainer, there's a sort of, we've got to go in a classroom, we've all got to sit there at the computer, and we've all got to listen to this person telling us what to do.
Yeah.
Those days pretty much have gone because of the lockdown and because of remote training. But IT trainer is not really a recognised. It's looked upon as an outgoing. It's a cost to the firm. When actually, without it.
Well, because I know you. So tech competency. It's not just about. So there's an element. There's many limbs to actually, but there's risk, isn't there, in terms of massive mistake, and then there's also efficiency. And I know that you've referred before to clients actually voting with their feet, and that there's a massive cost to that. And I think that seems to be, to clients are much more savvy. People generally are much more savvy about what's good and what's not good. And if it's
corporate legal tends to be more forward thinking on that front. I mean, again, I'm having to generalize here, but I do think that working within a corporate, there are different pressures on you, and it's maybe a bit more market focused, whatever your market happens to be, and your legal team will have to be market focused as well. Within a law firm, it's a different thing somehow. It's treated differently, and I don't really understand why that's the case. But as you say, it's got to be, the culture of the firm has got to be about having people who are efficient in everything they do, whether it's, their legal skills, which obviously are really critical. But, there's a lot of good lawyers out there.
Yeah.
But there are not that many good lawyers who are really competent to use the technology they've got. And they're talking about new technologies now that will take over certain roles, which they probably will.
Yeah.
But let's get them using what they've got now.
Yes, because it's not necessary. I think there's a sort of feeling that there's this intuitive, it's intuitive. Oh, I know. Oh, I don't have to be trained how to use my phone. Oh, I don't have to be trained. But actually, that's not right, is it? I mean, as you've mentioned Outlook, which people don't come out of law school. No, I believe it or not. God, we hate Outlook. Sorry, Microsoft. But they don't. And there's lots of technologies, aren't there, where actually they do like what you. I mean, I think I was going to save this to the end, but actually, I really want to bring this in just quickly. But you've had personal experience with buying a house where the document was so bad in terms of and they were using a very old version of Word, weren't they? I mean, so it's just about the basics that we assume that everyone can do, but it's not necessarily the case.
As a client, I mean, if I can take off my training hat and just be the client, which I was in this case, going through what I knew it was going to be stressful, and I had no idea it was going to be how stressful it was going to be. But the document that I received was in Times New Roman, which I don't think any law firm has been using for a long time. I don't know how long, maybe 15 years, probably 20. It was in Office 97, / 2003, which is not supported by Microsoft. It was formatted in a single column across 5 pages, and it was asking questions of me. Now, I probably could have answered the questions in the next column, but it's not easy. I really should have printed it out, but in the end, I just changed the format. Now, that firm has no quality control over its documents going out, clearly, because it wouldn't have come to me that way. And the fact that it has come to me that way from a large UK firm with lots of offices around the country makes me wonder what the rest of their documents look like. And is it because the lawyer involved doesn't have the skills? Possibly. Or is it because their secretary doesn't have the skills? Possibly. Or is it that there's a precedent document that's been sitting there? This is what you send to people who are buying a house. This is the inquiries that you will ask, and this is how we do it. And it's been used like that for 20 years. So it's as good as,
that's the worst.
That's good enough.
Isn't it? Do you think, or could it? I mean, could that be a templating issue? Is it a training issue? Is it templating?
It could be a precedent. I mean, most firms have banks of precedents, which are managed by. Sometimes they're managed by the individual lawyer. Sometimes they're managed by a PSL, and they are formatted when, for example, if you decided that your firm was going to change its house style and go to Calibri 11, then that person would be responsible for making sure all the precedents were updated to the new style. And then maybe you change your numbering style from 1.1 to 1.1 in brackets, whatever. So at that point, those precedent documents should already be reformatted to provide a very consistent look and feel for every firm's document that leaves that firm. I don't think that's happening at all.
Okay. What do you think? So what are the most, you deal with a lot of firms, and it was interesting you saying about, back in the day, when this first started out, it was very much a collaborative effort, wasn't it, amongst some of the biggest firms? A lot of the Magic Circle were involved. But what, and I know you've obviously worked with firms all over the world. So what some of the more, if I always quite like to write about firms that are progressive and other firms can sort of look to. What are the most progressive firms doing when it comes to training?
Well, I think one of the firms that's been very actively involved with LTC4 right from the beginning, and I'm not going to mention any names, but what they've done is they've used the core competency framework, they've taken the learning plans, and they've trained people to that level, which they'd be doing training anyway. And they did that right at the start, so it's probably, could be 4 or 5 years ago. What they're doing now is they're offering every single lawyer, and they've got thousands of lawyers across the world, they're offering them at least 1 hour, one-on-one with a training person, where they can raise any questions that they have about the day-to-day work that they have to do, and obviously, hopefully, get more efficient and get some help to do those things. I mean, that's heavy on manpower, but the reward is huge. And it's an hour, and time, as we know, is critical. I mean, that's the other thing, if you can save somebody half an hour, one every week, think what that would save. Multiply that by 400 lawyers.
Do they typically do that ROI? Do they? No, they don't. But that's, so many questions. So the shift is really interesting. I think that there must be an increasing need for lawyers to learn how to use the tech, because you already touched on it. The shift towards lawyers doing things themselves, and that has been accelerated in the lockdown, hasn't it? I think that lawyers were already, a lot of them, starting to draft their own documents. I personally sometimes wonder if it's time saving at all. Like, I don't know.
We talked about that today. We had a meeting, an LTC4 meeting in London, and we talked about whether or not it's really efficient for a lawyer who's struggling with a complicated document where they've got, lots of clauses and numbering, and they've got to do a table of contents. Is it better for them to struggle, or is it better for them to ring someone or send it to someone and get them to sort it out? And I think, that's a judgment thing, isn't it? And like everything, that lawyer has to make that judgment. If they know that they're proficient and they can do it, and they can do it quickly, then fine. But otherwise, but that's the same with any job. Do the job you're good at, learn to do it better if it helps, get help when you need it.
They need support, don't they? They still need very adequate support. I think law firms would be quite short-sighted to assume that lawyers are going to suddenly start being able to drop, and actually that it's a sort of efficient use of their time to be able to, particularly the ones that are slower, to be able to just draft all of this by themselves. I think it increases the likelihood of it not being formatted, blah blah blah. But also it just takes more time for some of them, doesn't it?
It's a very I mean, a lot of legal deals are very stressful, aren't they? They require huge amounts of time. And I think, well, we all know, if you've got a document that's for some reason not behaving itself, it's massively stressful. So you've got to have the opportunity to ring someone and get someone to help you. But the better their basic skills are the less likely that will happen. But the other thing is what they're sending out, which they may be sending out directly to the client, may still have track changes throughout.
Yeah.
They can have metadata which belongs to another client.
Which you referred to in your article, which which is just.
But then that lawyer probably didn't know about metadata.
No.
Know how to see it because the track changes or whatever were hidden. So those are the sorts of skills that you can't ignore. They're really critical.
With there's obviously a lot of technology that's coming onto the market to help make drafting much easier. And to automate. Finally, we're seeing some progress with document automation, which is quite exciting, even for more complex documents. I've seen some quite interesting examples recently of where it really is, making it much easier, and that is intended to be the lawyer who can, do you think does that reduce the need for training?
It may do slightly, but then they need to understand how that's working. And if you don't understand how the document is constructed and how that system is helping you, then yes, it still needs training.
So you need to be trained on the system that will automate it.
It's automating it, and it's not going to be a lot of training. You don't want to sit people, for hours and hours. You just need little bite-sized. This is how to do that better, and this is how this works, and so on. But yeah, document automation will be fantastic.
Yeah. Do you mean, and also, so there's a lot of emphasis now on no code platforms, and everybody doing it within the business. It makes me tiny. I think there's definitely progress there, but it makes me a tiny bit nervous as well. But I guess it's for the firms in terms of maintaining their oversight. Like the document that you got, I think it's great to start perhaps devolving and where people are capable of them creating. There's a lot of technology which is now enabling your workforce to do stuff which shouldn't be sat with IT, or it shouldn't be sat within a corporate legal department, whatever. You should be able to devolve and push work out so that actually it makes it more efficient. But how do they maintain central control? Is that something that they really need to be focusing on as you get more low code, no code, automated, lots more people touching the tech? How do they maintain control, and how do they maintain standards?
That's again, my fear slightly is that the technology will take on a life of its own, and the control will go, because people will trust it. They'll say, oh, it's fine, I've done it in XYZ system, which is automating my document, and I've told it all the information, and it's just going to build my document, and then I'll just quickly skim through it and it'll be fine.
Yeah.
But, it is difficult to imagine how the control will be retained. But, it will. It is about training. About training. Everything's about training in a way.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it?
Or not necessarily training, but understanding, perhaps. Maybe that's a better word. Understanding the process that this system is going through in order to produce your document.
Yeah.
So that when you do look at it and it suddenly comes up with something and you think, what's that? Why has that appeared? You will understand that clause was probably put in because of something you did.
So what you've got, is it 10 competencies?
We've got 9 which are around the day-to-day work. And then we have one which is around e-discovery and e-disclosure, which is a bit niche. Okay. So that's slightly different. But all of the others are around the workflows involved in working with legal documents, managing documents and emails, security, CRM, making visual presentations, time recording, all the kind of basic stuff that every lawyer has to do. And then there's a separate stream for support staff. Because in some cases, an example might be time recording. The lawyer does the time recording, but the secretary or the support person might have to be checking it or reporting on it, but they may not be allowed to actually record on that person's behalf. Hopefully they can't, but anyway, they do. So you want that, they need to have some understanding of those technologies as well, but there is a separate stream for them. And what we ask is a level of competence with certain skills depending on your job and whether or not you should have that responsibility. We don't expect lawyers to do complex track changes, all those sorts of things if they don't have those skills.
Do you have a recommended, so presumably not everyone needs to do everything, so for example a corporate lawyer wouldn't be expected to do discovery, but are there sort of a recommended number of competencies that everybody should have?
Well, I mean, I would think that the key ones would be the working with legal documents, managing documents and emails, which means knowing where to put them, how to find them again, searching for them quickly. Security is critical.
Yeah.
Time recording is critical. So those are the key ones. But what we say to a firm is look at where your pain points are, look at where your problems lie, and just concentrate on that one.
Yeah.
Just do them one at a time. Don't try and take on the world and try and train people to do everything. Just get one step forward each time. And that seems to be the way that it's worked well for those firms that are doing it. And then they get certificates and digital badges, and which may not be necessary, but they're good to have, aren't they?
Do the fee earners like that? Do the attorneys like that?
Some do. We didn't think they would, but they do. Where's my certificate? Where's my certificate?
I want a certificate. Do you know what? Sadly, we're out of time. We didn't talk about law schools, because just to mention law schools, if you're watching, but they obviously ought to be doing far more as well. I think there should be, perhaps if we conclude, it should be the next sort of 10 seconds. It should be just a shout out at every level for people to really put tech competency at the heart of what you're doing.
Ideally, they should be working on maybe a dummy system of some sort while they're doing their training. And so that's certainly the case in some law schools. So I think there's an awareness of it, probably more in law schools than even in law firms in a way. And that's good. But I know kids who are in law schools are really worried about encountering, software they've never used, and what will it be like and all of that. So they do need that help.
Thank you for chatting. Let's chat again soon. And I really appreciate you talking to me. Thanks, Jane.
Thanks a lot.